What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here again today for a redraft. I promised this redraft. I said I was going to get it done by the end of 2023, and I lied. I was not able to get it done. I was able to get 2001 done, but 2002 NHL redraft is here now. So that'll be the only time I have to do it. I go back to school tomorrow, though it is so cold. I've already had one of my classes call e-learning, which for me is fantastic. I love that e-learning. So, 2002 redraft, 30 picks on the board. We got 6 teams that did not have a pick in this draft: Rangers, Blues, Canucks, Lightning, Detroit, and Jersey. Detroit won the Cup that year, so they had the 30th pick, and you can see that's been traded a bunch. A lot of picks were traded in this draft, which is very interesting to me. But first overall, let's see. First overall in the original draft went Rick Nash, very good player, Hall of Famer, probably not. There is one player in this draft, however, that I think is a guaranteed Hall of Famer. Everyone else, I can't really see making it. He was originally taken by Chicago at number 54th overall. The future Hall of Fame defenseman, Duncan Keith, is who I would take first overall. 3 Stanley Cup championships, 2 Norris trophies, 2 gold medals, a Conn Smythe trophy. What hasn't Duncan Keith done with the Blackhawks? Almost basically his entire career there, aside from the one season at Edmonton. But Duncan Keith, what a career. One of my favorite players, of course, being a Hawks fan growing up, was my favorite defenseman on the team. And that Columbus acquired that pick via the Florida Panthers. Florida traded down to 3, and Columbus traded up to 1. So there's already a traded pick there. And Florida did that in back-to-back years. If everyone retires from 03, eventually we'll get to the 03. But so Rick Nash no longer going number 1. Instead, he's going to Atlanta at number 2. Originally, Atlanta chose the goaltender Kari Lehtinen. Interesting career to say the least, but Rick Nash would go number 2 to Atlanta. So imagine that already. Imagine you've got Heatley, imagine you got Kovalchuk, and then all of a sudden you have Rick Nash. So that would be quite a dangerous line, to say the least. You have Nash on the left side. You could have Kovalchuk in the middle and Heatley on the right. That might have been the most dangerous line in hockey at the time. But Rick Nash, originally chosen number 1, goes number 2. Florida with the number 3 pick, who they traded with Columbus for. With that pick, they originally chose Jay Bouwmeester. Very good defenseman. A career ended due to injury. Well, not injury. He went into cardiac arrest with the St. Louis Blues a couple years back. I'll never forget that because I was watching that game. And instead, we're going to take another player that's won a Stanley Cup like Duncan Keith. He's won a Conn Smythe as well. Not many players from this draft can say that they've done both of those. 2 of them, I think, can. I don't think anyone else in this can. Yep, only 2. And he's going at number 3. Originally taken by Carolina, 25th overall, the goaltender, Cam Ward, who also played with the Blackhawks. Cam Ward spent his last season in Chicago, and he was a very underrated goaltender. Carolina didn't make the playoffs a ton when he was there. He was a rookie. He came in for Martin Gerber in that 2006 playoffs, stole the show, Conn Smythe winner. 2007-2008, they don't make the playoffs. They were close in 2007. 2009, they go to the conference final. They lose in the conference final. And then they don't make the playoffs at all again for Ward's tenure there from 2010 to 2018. And it's unfortunate because Ward was a very good goalie. If you look at his numbers from that time period, most often than not, he was one of the better goalies in the league, just playing with Carolina. And he definitely wasn't the main reason that Carolina was not making the playoffs for a decade straight. Underrated goaltender, to say the least. Now, Philadelphia had the number 4 pick, which they acquired from Tampa Bay. I believe that was that the Chris Gratton deal? I don't remember. Anyway. But Joni Pikkanen was the defenseman who they chose 4th overall. In the redraft, from originally taken 24th overall by Toronto. Stanley Cup champion, not a Conn Smythe winner. Retired a little early due to injury. He was already near the end of his career, but he decided to hang him up. Alexander Steen was a very decent player in the NHL. Not one player in this draft ever hit 1,000 points. Rick Nash was the closest at 805, I want to say. But Alexander Steen, I believe, was second in the points in this draft, and he played a long time as well, over 1,000 games for him. Started his career in Toronto, and then spent the rest of his career in St. Louis. He'll always be known as a St. Louis man. Originally picked number 5 overall is the guy on Spit and Chicklets. Pretty sure they have their own vodka now, or some. I remember seeing the commercials on TV with Paul Bissonnette. Ryan Whitney, who I remember he was one of my first hockey cards. Shout out Ryan Whitney. A defenseman taken 5th overall by Pittsburgh. In the redraft, I don't take him. I would take Valtteri Filppula, who went to Detroit, 95th overall. So that's in the, I'll say, 3rd round. I'll take third. Honestly, maybe 4th round. But Valtteri Filppula would end up on the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it's kind of scary when you think of how good this forward core could have been. Filppula was a very good player. And there's a reason he signed a big contract with the Islanders. He never lived up to the Datsuk. He was never the Datsuk, never the Zetterberg. He was I would say, middle 6 forward. But he did have some pretty good years in Detroit. Islanders, he had, I think, 1 good year, and then I believe he came back to Detroit to finish his career, if I'm not mistaken. Moving on. Originally at number 6, Nashville took Scotty Upshall. And he is in the redraft. I don't have him taken here. But this guy might have been number 1 overall if he played his entire career in the NHL and if he stayed on Washington his entire career. People forget the dynamo that this man was, especially when I was younger. Whew. This guy had a 40-goal season, I remember that. When you play with Ovechkin and Backstrom, you're going to have some good years. Originally taken 13th overall by Washington. Alexander Semin. Only a little, 615 games I think I remember in the NHL, over 500-something points. He was fantastic in Washington. Eventually he moves on to Carolina and Montreal. He never had the same pizzazz, but Semin was fantastic in Washington. I mean, I remember that sissy fight I feel like he had with Mark Stahl when he was just throwing hands at, I don't remember who, I think it was Stahl. But what a dynamo. When he played with Ovechkin and Backstrom, he was impressive to watch. Now, taken number 7th, Anaheim originally chose Joffrey Lupul. Lupul, of course, had injury issues. He is later on in this redraft. Not a very top-heavy draft. Not a very excellent draft. I mean, we have common NHLers. It's not 1999. Nothing gets worse than 1999. But overall, this guy, we already mentioned his name. He was taken 3rd overall by the Florida Panthers. And we have Jay Bouwmeester. I believe he played the most games out of everyone in this redraft. Bouwmeester, good defenseman. Florida, Calgary, and St. Louis were his 3 teams. Played a very long time. Solid presence on the back end. He's kind of a bit of an all-around defenseman. He could score, he could skate, he could shoot, he could fight, he could hit, he could play defense, he could do whatever you need. Just what you expect out of a 3rd overall pick. Now, Minnesota at number 8. They chose Pierre-Marc Bouchard. I remember I had his hockey card. He was a forward, of course. And next I'd take... This is another guy that Detroit chose later on, because Detroit was very good at that. 58th overall, Detroit chose who I would take at number 8. A very good centerman. A very good defensive forward. Yuri Hudler, who also had some offensive potential in him as well. Of course, he was in Detroit, and I remember him when I was a kid at mostly when he was with Calgary. I remember he was, I believe, right near Iginla's end there. He was with Calgary. He was kind of the guy I always thought of when I thought of Calgary when I was younger, which is funny because he really did not spend as much time in Calgary as I thought. But good player, good defensive forward. And as you can see, this is a guy that I wouldn't really necessarily have in the top 10 of most drafts. I'd maybe have him at 15 through 20, and maybe later. But that's the draft we've been given here, so it's all it all depends on how good the players play out of that draft class. Number 9, Florida has another pick here. This pick was via Calgary, so that pick was traded from Calgary. Originally, Florida chose Peter Tachiak. No clue who that is. He was a forward. But instead, this guy was chosen 7th overall by the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. Joffrey Lupul would be going to Florida. Now, Lupul, of course, had injury issues. Ended up on Robidas Island and all that jazz with Toronto. But Florida in this timeline, you get Cam Ward, you got Joffrey Lupul. Maybe they wouldn't have been as bad as they were in Luongo. They already had Luongo. Did they have Luongo? They already did have Luongo. So I'm not sure Cam Ward would kind of be like the backup for Luongo, I guess. I mean, I'm not really sure who else was in net for Florida, because then Volkun comes in after Luongo, and it's Florida had a lot of issues in the 2000s. I'll say that. Not in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, they had Bure, and everything was happy go. Yeah, but oh well. Now 10th overall, Calgary. This pick was from Florida, and then I think it was via the Rangers, and then it was via Florida. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure which way it goes. But the pick was originally held by the Rangers, and it was also held by the Panthers. So Calgary gets the 10th pick, and with the 10th pick, they chose Eric Nystrom. In this redraft, we have an offensive defenseman. Picked 43rd overall. Won some cups at the end of his career. Was also a Chicago Blackhawk for a small amount of time. Wasn't good with the Hawks, but Trevor Daley went to Chicago, and then Patrick Sharp trade. And then, did I spell his name right? No, I did not. And then he did nothing, so I didn't like him. And then he went to Pittsburgh, and he won some Stanley Cups. So yeah, I wasn't very happy with Trevor Daley when he was with the Hawks, but you know what? Good for him. I know near the end of his career he had a bunch of injuries, but when he was with Dallas, that was when he was in his prime. Put up over almost 400 points. So for Daley, going 10th overall. Definitely not someone I'd probably have in my top 4. Maybe top 4 in his prime, but more of a bottom 2 defenseman in my eyes. But compared to everyone else on here, I mean, Duncan Keith is easily the one top 2 defenseman in this draft, and then after that, Bouwmeester's top 2, I'd say, and then Daley, I guess, would be your 3rd. I mean, not the best defensive draft class, but oh well. Now, number 11, this guy gets a lot of flack because of the contract he had with the Red Wings. I remember when it finally expired, it was like, hail to the Lord. But Buffalo has this pick at number 11, and they originally chose Keith Ballard, the defenseman. This guy went to the Islanders 87th overall, but he almost put up almost 500 points in the NHL. Franz Nielsen. Honestly, a guy that I kind of forgot about. But once the name came up, I remembered his name. And I just remember him for the bad contract, to be honest. I really don't remember him playing with the Islanders. I kind of just remember him all in Detroit. So for Franz Nielsen, that's really all I got to say on him. For number 12, we got Washington. Steve Eminger, a defenseman, who was picked. In this timeline, we have another Maple Leaf going. This is the second Maple Leaf. 57th overall to Washington. Has Washington had a pick yet? No, but that... Yeah, they have both back-to-back picks here, I think, 12 and... I'm really confused. So I think Washington is back-to-back picks here. Jeez, I wrote down Montreal and I was really confused for a second. That was really confusing. Anyway, so Matt Stajan, the former Maple Leaf and the Flame, would be going to Washington. Not a bad player by any means, but he was in Toronto when... He kind of showed up in Toronto when Toronto started going downhill. But he was picked number 57 overall. I remember that EA games always pronounce this guy's name wrong. They would say stay on. And that was kind of the most interesting thing about him. This stay on. No, it's Stajan. It's not stay on. Now back-to-back picks. Washington, this pick was via Dallas. And with this pick, they chose Alexander Semin, but he's obviously off the board already. So going 36th overall to Edmonton was this guy. He won some Stanley Cups with the Kings. He went to the final with the Oilers. And he was a good third-line center. Jarrett Stoll. Good player. Scored some important goals for the Kings. Scored some goals for the Oilers, especially. A guy went to the finals a bunch. I don't really remember when his career ended. I have no clue what happened to him after that 2014 Cup run with the Kings. Probably was with the Kings for a few more years, and I assume retired. But I really have no clue where this guy went. Number 14, Montreal. This pick was via Edmonton, so it looks like Montreal and Edmonton kind of swapped picks at 14 and 15. This guy was chosen 61st overall by Colorado. Montreal originally chose Chris Higgins, but this defenseman had a booming slap shot. He was with Boston in 2013. I want to say he was with them with the 2011 team as well. Picked by Colorado at number 61. I believe his career ended. I think he was the one who just had his career ended due to an eye injury. But Johnny Boychuk, I think it was him that was the one with the Islanders, is who he had the eye injury with. The booming slap shot is something I'll remember from that. I think it was Game 4 of the 2013 final. He was the one that just drove it past Crawford in that 6-5 OT win for the Hawks. But Boychuk, good defenseman. Definitely, I'd say a number 4 defenseman on this team. That fits in pretty well. But nothing much to say about him. Just booming slap shot, good player, won a Stanley Cup. What else do you need? Number 15, halfway mark. Originally, Edmonton chose Jesse Ninimaki. I assume I'm pronouncing that right, the forward. But here's where I'm taking the number 6th overall pick to Nashville, Scotty Upshall. Now, Upshall was a journeyman. He played on a lot of teams. I remember him in St. Louis. I feel like I remember him in Florida. Definitely some other teams in there as well. But Upshall, I remember looking at his totals, and I thought he scored more points than he did. But definitely not worthy of a 6th overall pick. But still overall good middle 6 guy, 3rd liner, decent career. Yeah. Now, number 16 to Ottawa, Jakob Klepis was chosen by Ottawa. Don't know who that is. Buffalo chose this guy, 241st overall, and his NHL career came to an end after he hit a referee. People know probably who I'm talking about by that statement, but Dennis Weidman. Dennis Weidman was a good defenseman. And then he hit a referee in the back, and he never returned to NHL ice from what I can remember. That was a weird incident because Weidman played with a lot of teams. He was drafted by Buffalo. Remember him in Boston and Calgary. Wasn't he in Washington for a bit as well, I think? Kind of moved around a bit as a defenseman, but he wasn't a bad defenseman by any means. Number 17, Washington chose Boyd Gordon. This is where I'm taking the number 8 overall pick in this draft by Minnesota, Pierre-Marc Bouchard. I honestly didn't know much about this guy. This pick was via Vancouver, by the way. So what trade would that have been for? Was that the trade that sent Linden back to Vancouver? That makes the most sense to me. But, what was I writing? Bouchard, yeah. So Washington would end up with Bouchard. That is their 3rd first-round pick this year, as their rebuild was in full swing. They would have had Stajan, Stoll, and Bouchard. I mean, not the best parts of a rebuild, I would say, but Bouchard put up over half a point a game in his career. He only played around 500-something games. Remember him playing more. Don't really remember much about him, though. Number 18, LA has this pick, and they chose Dennis Gribishkov. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Instead, he was a defenseman. Instead, I'm taking a guy that won a Stanley Cup in Boston, and was picked 67th overall by Florida. He was traded with Nathan Horton to Boston in that 2010-11 season. Gregory Campbell. And, of course, the most memorable part of Gregory Campbell's career was that shift he did with a broken leg. I think it was against Pittsburgh, if I recollect correctly. So Pittsburgh was the top team in the Eastern Conference Final in 2013. They were on a power play. I think it was a shot from Letang that was blocked by Campbell, broke his fibula, which is the back of your leg, and he played the entire shift with a broken leg, and he made it to the bench and killed the entire penalty off. That was one of the loudest ovations I've ever heard for someone that didn't score a goal, and it was inspiring to say the least. And why does it say I have free I need to free... I'm not even going to question that. But yeah, picked 67th overall by Florida. Heart and soul guy, 4th line center if you're on a good team. Pretty good player. Now Phoenix with the number 19 pick chose Jakob Corius, and 2 Jakobs and 4 picks. Instead, they're choosing a guy that was a Blackhawk very briefly. I believe it acquired in 2016 at the deadline with Dale Weiss. Thomas Fleischmann. I feel like I remember this guy being a lot better than he was. Very long name, hard to spell. And that's really all I got to say about him. I remember him in Washington, Montreal, Chicago. Drafted by Phoenix. But yeah, he was chosen number 63rd overall to Detroit. So another Detroit pick in here. So we have 1, 2, that's already pick number 3 for Detroit. and we still got one more in this one. Moving on to number 20, Buffalo chose Daniel Paille, who I remember being a pretty good player on that 2013 Boston team. And then I looked at his stats, and I'm thinking, how does he only have 172 points, I think it was, in his career? But this is where I'm going to choose the guy that went 4th overall. I honestly have... Oh, this pick was traded around a lot. New Jersey, Dallas, Columbus all had this pick before Buffalo. But the defenseman, Joni Pitkanen. I'm going to be honest here. I have no clue who this person is. No recollection of them playing. I saw that they had pretty good stats, but they didn't play a lot of games in the NHL, but they had a pretty good number of points in the NHL. Chosen 4th overall. If I don't remember him in 2002, he might have been done in the NHL by the time I came around. But I can't really say much on him. But just his numbers speak for himself, and that's why I have him going at number 20. Now, 21st overall, Chicago laid a dud, and they selected Anton Babchuk as a defenseman. This is where Chicago gets a guy that would play on the third line in my guys, Chris Higgins. Not much to say about him. I had a bunch of his hockey cards, Montreal, and Calgary. I remember those. I think he was on those two teams. I feel like I remember him with the Rangers as well. I'm thinking of someone else. But I don't know. He was originally picked 14th overall by Montreal. Moving on. That's the only first-round pick the Blackhawks had in this draft. And this was the one year they made the playoffs in the early 2000s. Let's see. New York Islanders, 22nd overall. They chose with this pick Sean Bergenheim, if I remember correctly, was pretty good in Tampa. But this pick, the Islanders choose someone who went to Pittsburgh, 234th overall, scored both winning goals in Game 7 against Detroit in 2009. And that should be a big clue if you remember that game, because Maxime Talbot is the guy. What a great guy to have in your locker room. This is a guy I would love to go to the rink and see every morning. Every clip you ever see of him, it's always him joking around, goofing off, having a fun time. He was one of those guys that I think I would love to have been teammates with. And, of course, he stood up for his teammates. He fought. He was able to score some goals. He wasn't known for scoring, but he always came up in the clutch, seemed like, for Pittsburgh. Also played with Philadelphia, interestingly enough. 23rd, Phoenix has another first-round pick. This pick was via St. Louis. I believe this was part of the Keith Tkachuk trade. And with this pick, they chose the former Blackhawks Stanley Cup champion, Ben Eager. Unfortunately, Eager doesn't go in the first round, and neither does Adam Burish, another Blackhawk. But they choose another guy that was drafted by Chicago, number 156th overall, and I can tell you a story about this one. Defenseman James Wisniewski. Make sure I spell this right. So, James Wisniewski was with the Blackhawks until 2008-09. They get eliminated by Detroit in the playoffs, and he goes to Anaheim. So Seabrook and Wisniewski were defensive partners. They were drafted very close to each other. I mean, Seabrook he was supposed to be the speaker. Wisniewski was supposed to speak at Seabrook's wedding in 2009. During the 2009-10 season, at the beginning of it, when the Hawks played Anaheim, Wisniewski laid a massive hit on Seabrook after Seabrook laid a huge hit on Corey Perry, knocked him out completely. It was a dirty hit. Wisniewski was suspended for it, and that hit, he was no longer going to speak at Seabrook's wedding after that hit. I don't really remember the game, to be honest. It was really early on when I started watching hockey. That would have been the second season. Regular season 2009-10. It was also an Anaheim game, so who knows if I saw the entire game, because as a child, I did not stay up that late. But, yeah. I know that was a story that my dad told me about Wisniewski. And, interesting enough how friendships could change so drastically over one hit. It's a telling tale, to say the least. So he was picked 156th overall by Chicago, and would end up in Anaheim. 24th overall is where Alexander Steen went to Toronto. He doesn't go here. Instead, we have a guy little over almost 600 games in the NHL, but he has almost half a point a game, so I just chose him. Went to Calgary 90th overall, and I feel like I've already done his name, so maybe he was drafted twice. But Matthew Lombardi. I remember the name Lombardi. I really don't remember much about him, but I remember him. I feel like I remember him in NHL Slapshot of all games. Moving on to number 25. Cam Ward was selected by Carolina here, and this is a guy. He didn't score a lot of points, but he played a lot of games, showing his services. I remember him in Washington. He was picked 17th overall, and that's Boyd Gordon. I never knew what this guy's first name was, but then I put the name to the face, or the Gordon to the Gordon. I looked him up, and it was who I remembered. One of the more defensive forwards for the Washington Capitals during their run in the early 2010s, or late 2000s, depending on what your perspective. But overall, decent player. I mean, nothing much to say here. Do I remember him a ton? No. If we talk about the guys I remember Keith, Rash, Ward, Steen, Filppula, Semin, Bouwmeester, Hudler. Honestly don't remember much of Lupul. Daly, yes. Stoll, yes. Boychuk, yes. Upshaw, Weidman, Campbell, Talbot. Most of the draft, but obviously I'm not going to remember every player from when this was happening, because all these guys are retired now. That's the thing. I only do redrafts when every single player is retired. All of these guys are now retired, so I feel like I can do the redraft. I mean, retired or playing overseas, because, yeah. But, yeah. So moving on, what do we have next? Pick numbers 26 went to Dallas, where they chose Martin Wagner. In this timeline, they choose a defenseman who went 129th overall to Colorado. Another guy I have no recollection of, but Tom Gilbert had the most points and games played when I was going down the list of players that I had left to do in the redraft. I scroll down to everyone I passed to see who's next, and Gilbert was leading the categories in both, so I thought, well, I kind of have to go with him now. So Tom Gilbert going 26th overall to Dallas. This pick was via Washington and via, looks like, Philadelphia. Not sure what trade that could have been, but oh well. Next pick, San Jose chose 27th overall Mike Morris. And in this redraft, this is where they take the number 5 overall pick, Ryan Whitney. Ryan Whitney, a guy I don't remember much playing, but of course he's popular now with his social media presence on Spit and Chicklets, and of course his commercials with his branding, and with Paul Bissonnette, who's on TNT. So links there. Much bigger world, or depends on your perspective, bigger or smaller world. You say it's a bigger world because you can see these guys who you might not remember, or it's a smaller world because everything's more connected now. But yeah, so Ryan Whitney, 5th overall, goes 27th in the redraft. 28th overall, Colorado chose Jonas Johansson, and I don't think they're talking about the current Jonas Johansson, but he was a forward. But instead they choose the guy that went to Buffalo at number 11, the defenseman Keith Ballard, who I do remember, and I remember he had some massive injury problems because he took a hard hit, and I believe it was a hit that was suspended. I don't remember who took the hit, but I remember when he was in Vancouver, I want to say, he went hard. It was in Vancouver or Minnesota. It was one of those two places. He went hard into the boards, and I remember his career was never the same. It might have been concussions that really ended his career. That's a common theme in this, I feel like, in this redraft. You have Steen, whose career ended a little early. Bouwmeester's career ended probably half a season early. Lupul, Daly, Boychuk, among others as well. I can't really remember off the top of my head, but pretty common theme. Now, number 29 overall, Boston chose a guy that would end up in the Rockford Ice Hogs organization. Hannu Toivonen was a goaltender during the Blackhawks run to the 2010 Cup. However, he was not a goaltender because he was not on the team. He was in Rockford with Corey Crawford back then. Originally, this guy was chosen 22nd overall by the Islanders. This is where I'm going to take Sean Bergenheim. And Bergenheim, if this is the Bergenheim I'm remembering, I remember him in Tampa in 2011. The 2011 playoffs when Tampa was made that one-off playoff run to the conference final, and Bergenheim, I remember, was like a killer to Boston in that conference final. I'm not sure if that's the same Bergenheim. I believe it is. Not a very common name, I would think. But Sean Bergenheim, very clutch player with Tampa. I don't remember him with the Islanders. I don't really remember him anywhere else but that 2011 Tampa series, which is why he's that low, because his point totals tell me otherwise, and his clutchness is kind of what got him into the first round. Now at number 30, Atlanta would choose Jim Slater. This would have been Detroit's pick, and ironically, a Detroit player is who I chose here. 291st overall. He didn't retire too long ago either, but Jonathan Erickson. I remember him much after the Detroit Dynasty. He came in. He was in the Grand Rapids system when they were really good, and then guys started retiring, Lindstrom and all those guys, and he was one of them that kind of came up to prominence. Had a wicked wrister from the point, but I remember that. But this pick was via Detroit, Buffalo, and Columbus. Fun fact, this pick was the pick traded in the Dominik Hasek trade. You see, it was via Detroit. That pick was traded to Buffalo, and I remember that Slava Kozlov also went to Buffalo. Then that pick ended up being moved to Columbus at some point, and somehow then ended up in Atlanta. So I'm not sure how this works in the whole of the grand scheme of things, but overall, that's going to conclude the redraft. All I have left is some honorable mentions. Kari Lehtinen went second overall to Atlanta. He would probably go early in the second round here. Matt Green won some cups with the LA Kings. He went 44th overall to Edmonton. Just missed out. Daniel Paille, he went 22nd overall. He did not go 22nd overall to the Islanders. He went, where did he go? I remember he was in the first one. He went 20th overall to Buffalo. I'm not sure why I wrote 22nd. And then Eric Nystrom went 10th overall to Calgary, and he just missed out as well. But that's going to conclude this redraft, everyone. Tell me down below what you thought. Tell me down below who you would pick where. And tell me honestly, tell me whatever. Are you guys facing the cold thresh that we're having in Chicago right now? It is -12 outside, and I am not going outside. I have school starting tomorrow. I've already had some of my classes canceled, and I hope they continue to get canceled. So that's going to be all I have for you guys in this one. Look for another video coming soon discussing the NHL. I want to do a video on that. As well, there was another topic I want to do a video on, and it's going to be expansion. We're going to do 2 videos on that in the near future. Not sure when that's going to be, but that's going to be all I have for you guys in this one. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I shall see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.